this is a real honor to have really the three experts on this subject, which is clearly #1 subject on everybody's mind. And these gentlemen come at it from every angle. We've got airline pilot and senior manager, one of our member carriers, professor of aviation at one of, if not the leading aviation university in the United States, and FAA's regulatory and policy expert on not only this, but so many issues. Dave Bushy, who is the President and Chief Operating Officer of Cape Air. John Duncan at the far end, who's the FAA's Deputy Director of Flight Standards and Policy Oversight. And Kent Lovelace, who is the professor at University of North Dakota. So I really want to thank you all for taking time from your very busy schedules to join us. And let's get right off on it. The supply of aviation professionals, obviously, top priority for everybody in this room. Everybody's talking about it. It's the #1 question I get asked by the press. But I have a real hard time trying to explain this issue to people outside of the industry, in layman's terms. What we say in the PR world, you know, what's the elevator speech about describing the topic? So as we do that, if you could boil, I'd like each of you, and we'll go in alphabetical order, to #1, just expand a little bit about your background and where you're coming, you know, and some of your bona fides about this. But more importantly, how would you describe it to the person at the grocery store, your neighbor? How would you describe the issue? Dave?
Well, thank you. First of all, I'm probably not as much of an expert as anybody in this room, so I'll try to channel the experts that are sitting out in the room. Each one of us knows this business very, very well, but collectively, we have a great expertise in this room, so thank you for letting me channel your thoughts. I've been in this business for 34 years. It's gone by pretty quickly. I'm not unique, but I'm a little bit different than most in that I started out in a commuter airline, Pilgrim Airlines, flying Twin Otters and Beech 99s, and progressed from there to Delta Airlines, 25 years there. Flew a lot of different airplanes and worked in leadership positions. Ended up being Senior Vice President of Flight Operations. Then I was recruited by JetBlue, a startup carrier, as their first Vice President of Flight Operations. Then I decided to come back home, and I joined Cape Air almost 6 years ago as Chief Operating Officer and now President. I fly the line in the summer, so I've flown Twin Otters on one end of my career, 402s on the other end of my career, 767s, Airbuses, and a bunch of other airplanes in the middle. So I've seen pilot shortages throughout my career. There have been a lot of pilot shortages, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Today, you just saw a lot of the demand issues. By the way, Dan got a freight elevator. Do we get a high-speed elevator?
Yeah.
So, but Dan very, very succinctly described the demand out there, some of the issues that we see, so I don't really need to reiterate those. But from a supply end, we always depended on the military to provide mil-spec pilots for us. I use the term mil-spec because I come from the service. I did not fly in the service. I went through a Part 141 structured school, and using the GI Bill. But the military did a great job for us, and they were our primary feed. That transitioned over the last 20 years to the regionals being pretty much 50% of the feed or more. Now many of the carriers, the mainline carriers, over 50% of their new pilots sitting in front of them now are from regionals. The military is drying up. A few transport pilots, but mostly UAV pilots, people that sit in trailers out west flying airplanes on missions on the other side of the world. Can't particularly hire those until we buy UAVs, and I hope that doesn't happen in my lifetime. So that's not there. We've seen a decline in the luster of the image of the airline pilot. We all collectively own that. We all collectively own that. We can't blame anybody, but that's something that has happened. We have to correct, and I think we will do a good job correcting that. So that has caused a diminishment in the number of people entering. Some people just aren't excited about this business anymore. So you've got not enough supply from the military, not enough coming into the ranks of the regionals, and then of course We don't have pipeline pathway programs in the business. We rob Peter to pay Paul, which is a very good way of putting it. There's nothing codified. There's no pathway. When my son went to college, he had his private. He didn't want to become an airline pilot. I wish he had, because I think it's a great career. It's exciting to be on a flight deck with all those passengers behind you, landing in great destinations and weather, but that's not in the cards right now until we change the equation. So I think that's not a short elevator speech, but you've got a supply issue right now. We can correct it, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit later.
Okay. I'd like to, before we go to John, maybe let's, Allison, if you throw up that very kind of discouraging slide, that first slide, please, that talks about the FAA's number of pilot certifications. Just turn it over to John, though.
There we go. Okay, thanks. Thanks for the discouraging slide.
We always got the FAA's
yeah,
back.
good. I got you. I appreciate that. I've spent 15 or 20 years in the aviation industry in the training realm, as well as in the air transportation business. Did a lot of flying all over the country and all over the world, and started with the FAA in 1986, and have been in the field as an inspector and manager, and worked my way through the FAA organization to the Deputy Director of Flight Standards. Been involved in the policy issues for a while. We've been deeply involved in this in a number of different ways. One is, obviously, we see the concern, we see the issues that are developing, and we also are involved in rulemaking that obviously has an impact on these issues. The flight duty and rest rule that was mentioned earlier today is going to have some impact, clearly. There's going to be some change in the way the industry deals with those rules. Those are important rules that have been coming or been due for change for 30 years probably, and we were able to get those done. We think they're a good set of rules. We think that they're adaptable, but we also recognize there's going to be some impact that we have to deal with. The other impact is the first officer qualification rule. That's one, the 1,500-hour rule, that's clearly going to have an impact. As most of you know, I think the 1,500-hour requirement basically is statutory August of next year, and the statute allows us to do rulemaking that would mitigate some of the impacts of those, and that rulemaking is going on. I think you all saw the NPRM that was out recently, and so we think there's some opportunities there to mitigate that. There are challenges in getting those rules out, but we see those impacts, and we're working to try to mitigate them.
Kent?
Well, just as a quick note about my background, I started flying when I was 15, and when I was going to head to college, I was going to be an airline pilot. I started flight instructing and found my true passion, which is education, and I have no regrets on that path at all. I've been involved at the University of North Dakota for over 30 years. I'm currently chairman, as you said, and in that role, I'm constantly involved in the recruitment of students into our program and so forth. And we started seeing a trend of diminishing interest in students wanting to fly professionally. And in 2009, we did a forecast, myself and Professor Jim Higgins, at the bequest of the National Defense Transportation Association, and that's where it kind of all started in terms of our looking at numbers and trying to project things. And a quick elevator answer, or quick elevator for slow elevator answer, whatever. To the issues, we know we've got big retirements. Paul Railsback has shared almost 28,000 pilots retiring from the majors. You have fewer people involved in trying to learn interested in learning to fly, and then those that are interested in flying professionally is another hit. And that graph showed the decline in annual certificates issued by the FAA. Private pilot certifications down by 64% on an annual basis between 1990 and 2010. Commercial and ATP certification is down by about a little over 50% in that same time period. So the number of certificates being issued is just less. There's fewer general aviation hours being flown and so forth. Second element is you've got those students that want to fly professionally, fewer of them want to fly for the airlines. In our case, and it's just a simple question I ask the first day of my class every semester, what do you want to do down the road? And 15, 20 years ago, they would not only tell me what airline they wanted to fly for, but they would tell me what aircraft they want to fly for.
Excuse me, I think we have a slide that shows that. Yeah,
that's part of that.
Yeah.
And at best, 50% of the students now that want to fly professionally are seeking a long-term airline career. The slide that's up here is the results of a study done by Professor Beth Bierke and Professor Dan Malott at the University of North Dakota. They surveyed 17 different college institutions and were surveying the flight instructor force of those institutions and asked three basic questions. When you started flight training, what did you want to do? And I think the number is roughly 69% wanted to be an airline pilot. And again, these are all active flight instructors, so they're seeking a professional career. And you can see that as we ask further questions, their long-term career interest to be an airline pilot it diminishes. And it's below that 50% mark in this particular study, at least with these particular students. And that kind of ties in with what Dave said, where the perceptions of an airline career certainly isn't what it used to be for these young people. And so there's that limitation. So we've got retirements on the top, we've got low incoming supply, you've got an increased number of students that want to fly professionally that are thinking of other careers than the airline industry as a professional pilot. And then you start throwing in some ancillary things that have already been mentioned, the 1,500-hour rule, which I've got some data on that the perceived negative impact of that is substantial to young people. You've got foreign intervention or a little interest in American pilots. We all know there's a Boeing forecast out there that predicts 466,000 pilots needed worldwide. And that's something that the U.S. industry hasn't had to deal with in the past, is substantial amounts of foreign growth in the airline industry. We have already been approached by a foreign carrier that said, do you think your students would be interested in, with about 1,000 hours, we were to hire them about 1,000 hours, come and fly for us, 14 days on, 14 days off. We'll give them a first-class seat from one of our gateway cities to our main hub, and then give them a first-class seat back home. And every student I've asked, I've said, would you be interested in doing that? And the hands go up. So you've got new competitions that haven't existed in the past, and that's part of the dilemma. As Dave said, I think we can combat it and turn it around, but it's going to take industry partnering with all of us that provide flight training and flight education to do it.
I don't want to stay on this too much with you, give you a break, grab a glass of water, but I'm the dad of a 22-year-old son and 24-year-old son. And I know how those kind of guys are. On a scale of, you're dealing with them all every day. On a scale of 100 being some kid back in the 50s whose only dream, these romantics about, they grew up looking at the airplanes, flying off, and every day they'd go out to the local airfield and look. That's a scale at the one end of the spectrum. And the other I'd put, which is like one of my sons who's just the ultimate cynic, skeptic, everything is terrible, it all sucks, how it is. And why would I ever want to be an airline pilot, What's your, that's a 0. What's your median student?
A median student, and again, you'd have to, I would reference that to those students that want to fly professionally. That's roughly currently, and just to put it as a side note, and I don't want to belabor things, my apologies, I'm a professor, so I like to talk apparently. 55% of our student body at the University of North Dakota is interested in professional flight. We have 1,300 undergraduate majors, so 55% want to be a professional pilot. That compares to the long-term average of about 75%. So our student body is shifting and it's shifting away from professional flight into other arenas, air traffic control management, and a new threat to the professional piloting career, which is unmanned aircraft systems operations. But if you take a look at those, students that want to fly professionally, you know, again, I would say that the median is about that 50 percentile mark.
They know what they're getting into?
Yep, we are very honest with them. But what you don't see is, you know, when I grew up, I had diamonds embedded in my face because I was pressing my face up against the chain link fence watching airplanes take off and land at the airport. And you don't see that as much. You still see that passion with some, but it's not as prevalent as it used to be. Flying professionally isn't viewed as glamorous, perhaps, or the mystique that it once had. And that's there's other opportunities that young people are looking at.
Going back to the slide about the FAA slide, if you could please, Allison. I called it discouraging, John. On Independence Avenue, you all generated the information for the slide.
Right.
What's the perspective of that slide inside the building?
I would characterize it as discouraging also. I mean, for us, it's a data point, but for us, it says the same thing that we're talking about here, that there are concerns about the development of the labor force that is available for the air transportation industry. That has a safety impact. That puts pressure on the aviation community to look at standards and to deviate from those standards on occasion. So that's an important slide for us, and we're seeing the same thing. I personally am actively involved in general aviation, and I see the same loss of interest in that regard. In general aviation also. There aren't a bunch of kids who are interested. My son is 16, and he's interested, but he doesn't see a path, I don't think. He doesn't see a path to getting where he wants to be. An achievable path is really the issue. And like these guys, there is some difference there in the way we came about. You know, my mother tells a story that when I was like 3 years old, I saw an airplane fly overhead, and I looked up and I said, when I grow up, I want to regulate those things. So, yeah.
You're living the dream.
There you go. Exactly. So, but the issue is that kind of enthusiasm, I think, is not what it used to be for some reason.
Correct. When you said that within the building, it's a data point.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, if I looked at that, it would scare me a lot more than just being a data point. I would say, has the agency really looked at the why of this and come up with any solutions as to how to maybe stop that line from going straight down like that?
We have from a number of different directions. We've looked at it from a regulatory standpoint. What pressures are the regulations putting on? Clearly, whenever we take any regulatory action, we're looking at the impact on the agency. We're doing cost benefit, and we're looking at the impact on, I should say, the industry. So we're looking that way. We also are very concerned about how we turn that around, how we get more folks involved. And John Allen has proposed U.S. Aviation Academy that I think most of you have seen that would create a public-private participant partnership, if you'll allow the alliteration, that would create an organization using existing educational institutes to provide a source of pilots. And potentially what that would do is provide a structured pathway. The work that you all are doing at JetBlue and Cape Air clearly provides a structured pathway that folks can see, and I think it provides some encouragement for folks to get involved in. And we believe that an academy structure could provide that same kind of pathway.
We're going to come back to that.
Okay.
I'd like to come back and explain a little bit more about that,
Right.
Give you a break for some water. And before we get on to the pathway thing, you know, I'm a student pilot myself. With all of about 10 hours in my logbook, and that included getting free lessons when I worked at AOPA.
You're a real pilot.
Yeah, I really pilot. But I've been in and around the airline business for, I hate to say this, since 1972. And I've heard this pilot shortage song and dance dozens of times. And every time it kind of like comes and goes and everybody manages through this. And oh, the sky's falling and pilot shortage. Heard it back in the 70s, I heard it in the 80s, heard it in the 90s. It perennially comes up. Why is this different?
This is probably markedly different in magnitude, but not different in what we've seen historically. Dan made some good points about pilot shortages that have occurred selectively in the industry. I remember the 60s, and I lived through the 60s, so I don't know why I remember them. But the 60s...
So did I, and it was great.
Yeah, it was a good time, wasn't it? But in the 60s, United and American did ab initio training. They didn't call it that. They just hired people off the street and put them through flight training. They were that desperate. They upgraded a lot of professional engineers. I flew with some of them. There were some shaky pilots at times there, and so it had an effect from a safety standpoint. So we had some shortages there in the late 60s. We have all created our own shortages at different times too, as we've unabashedly taken pilots from different sources. I did it one day. I got a call, Senior Vice President of Flight Operations at Delta. I get a call, I didn't even identify himself. Your blankety blank HR department just hired 6 of my check airmen. I said, who is this? 6 check airmen. Well, that's no big deal. Delta has 400 check airmen. Six people would be nothing. My regional partner was brought to his knees because what happened? The seed corn was taken from his organization and he wasn't able to train enough people. So he parked a couple airplanes, was mad at me. Now, from a regulatory standpoint, are there any lawyers in the room? I can't talk about whether we had any agreement, but we certainly tried to be more circumspect in the future. What each carrier does that to itself and to other carriers inadvertently. And why? Because we don't tell the pilots, if you follow this path, if you follow through this pipeline, you're going to get to a goal. Almost every other profession does. If you're a surveyor, if you're an engineer, if you're a Indian chief, lawyer, or doctor, you have a pathway. We allow people to erratically move through an industry expecting that they're somehow going to magically appear when we ring the bell. The point that I want to make, and it came to me years ago, is these are not commodities. Pilots are not commodities. There are pilots sitting in this room, and they have names, they have lives, they have aspirations. They're not commodities. They're not oil. They're not aluminum. They're not parts. We've forgotten that. We look at a data point and don't see human beings. I think it's critical that we get back to the relationships. How many people in this room, and you don't need to raise your hands, visit an aviation university or a structured training academy once a semester? I applaud John and John Allen for being at every one of these conferences and at RACA and places like that. How many people are members of the Aviation Accreditation Board International? I can tell you there are 5 airlines that are members of it, because one major airline had to study for 2 years whether they wanted to spend $2,850 to be a member of the Aviation Accreditation Board International, which accredits great institutions like University of North Dakota. Why? Because we get so focused on the commodity and we get so focused on the bell that we're going to ring and people will show up at the door. So historically there have been shortages. This is going to be much greater magnitude, and I suspect we will park airplanes. But by the way, we parked airplanes back in 2006 and 2007 because we didn't have enough pilots, because we lost so many pilots. April generally is the month we lose most of the pilots because they go to carriers that are going to fly all summer. So it happens.
Perspective, either you gentlemen, on that same thing. Why is it different?
Go ahead.
Okay, I guess my opinion is it's first of all, the supply side is so much further decreased than it was in the past. So you've got that nemesis there that you're dealing with. And I would argue that, as Dave said, we've already been there a few times. I know that there was a chief pilot from one of the member companies here of RAA that in the 08, when things started to unravel economically, he said the things that saved us was the age 65 rule changing in December of 2007, excuse me, and then the Great Recession that started in 08. He said that's the only thing that saved us. I had students at that point that were leaving our program, and I'm thankful that in early 2000s we invested in a advanced jet simulator based on a CRJ platform. I'm glad we did that because we had students leaving our program going right to a regional carrier, flying a jet with 300 hours of flying time. Now, some would argue that's a shortage, and they proved to be successful, but you know, it was that tight. I had students coming to me during that time period saying, "Ken, I've got a problem." I said, "What's the problem?" They said, I got a job offer." And I said, "What's wrong with that?" They said, "I wasn't looking for one." And when they went to a career fair that we had, they were literally being pulled by the arm by one of the interviewers, HR people or people representing the chief pilot's office, and getting an interview on the spot to fly for that airline. So I think we've already had shortages in the past. I think they've already existed. And I think, again, the difference here is there's so much pressure coming from so many different directions on the top side with retirements, the supply side with the shortage of people not wanting to fly. You've got these little ancillary things, as I've said before. You got the crew fatigue, rest issues. You've got 1,500-hour rule. You got foreign intervention. There's just so much happening.
John, how do you see it?
I agree. Clearly, there have been relievers in the past that have occurred, all the ones that have been mentioned already. Secondly, we got kind of a perfect storm this time around. There are all the things that have been mentioned already. I think the world, the international pressure is probably different this time around. In the past, the international pressure has been less. There's been less international pressure, and in part because they have a different paradigm. They have a different approach to life with regard to pilot certification than we do, pilot supply than we do. And in fact, that may be one of the things that we need to look at, is whether our paradigm needs to change about how we develop pilots and how we prepare them to be appropriately qualified to take the right seat of an air transportation airplane.
That's, I'm not beating up on the FAA, but this is really almost a beat up on the industry, again, from a layman and a student pilot. Right. The thing that has always struck me was that the whole training regimen from the start, just from that beginning, for anybody who might even be interested in becoming a pilot, a general aviation pilot, is still stuck in some kind of time warp going back to the 50s. Right. That if you go to a typical, you know, I hate, you know, if I offend anybody, you know, so be it. It's not the first time I'll have offended anybody. But one of the, you know, you go to fly school, and you walk in there, and it still may have the metal desks. It's, you know, and to try to attract sophisticated people, let alone sophisticated young people who are used to everything automated, and it's almost like a walk into a time warp. Mm-hmm. Has the agency and has the industry, from your perspective, kind of looked at that and said, hold on a second, we need to totally change this whole regimen so that the person doesn't, at least who makes that first step, make it that the first step isn't the last step. They say, oh, I'm not doing this anymore.
Right. Yes. Clearly, we've looked at that. It's a difficult question for us. When the concept of multi-crew pilot licensing came out from ICAO some time ago, we looked at that, and I think we said the same thing the industry said, and that is we have a different culture. We have a different structure. In our structure, the pilots come to us for all practical purposes. We don't develop them. And so for quite a while, we pushed back on that. The industry, I don't believe, was ready to step up and talk about that kind of approach. It may be time to start looking at that. It may be time to start looking at a different model. It may be past time to start. It may be time that we engage in looking at a different model. We've got some challenges now because a lot of the statutory, a lot of the legislation that's occurred lately seems to kind of put that current system in stone. Yeah. And so we've got the challenge of working around that, but we need to look at that differently. But it requires a paradigm change, not only on our part for the FAA, but also on the industry's part, because those folks that are doing that kind of work have a considerable amount of skin in the game. They're not waiting for pilots to come to them. They're producing pilots for all practical purposes. So, and maybe the academy approach may be a hybrid way to deal with that.
What's your perspective on that, about that, Dave, about the training regimen and so forth? And then let's go back to the academy, because from my kind of Washington take on this, you'd have to have a sea change in attitude by both Congress, the regulators, maybe even the traveling public, that the person flying your airplane, this is just a career. They decided they were going to do this, and you put them into a program, and you made them an airline pilot and entrusted them. That's going to take a huge attitudinal shift by everybody. Everybody's going to have to get on that train together.
We got to come to grips with the fact that pilots are developed and not born.
Yeah, that's that. And I think that's it.
Right.
You want to repeat this and make sure everybody, the pilots are developed and not born. And that's not what we, in even popular culture, have kind of been led to believe, that they're not developed, that they're somehow born, and that they're somehow special. And it's not just a job that you can train somebody for. Do you think it's a job you can just take somebody off the street and train them for? Or Kent?
You can educate, I want to say almost anybody, but what the outcome will be unknown. I mean, so yeah, first of all, anything we do, as you said, you're not born with it. It's not intrinsic. You're something that's learned, and you go through that process. And some people have better strengths and capabilities for certain things that they need to learn. So there needs to be, I think, a new training paradigm would certainly be appropriate. And it's just simple things even that we could start out with. And I'm not going to bash the FAA either.
Notes.
No, but several years ago they started to reduce the under 141. The FAA reduced the amount of time it could use in simulation towards certification process. But yet the fidelity of simulators are increasing, and if we could do more with simulation, perhaps we can lower the cost, to make it more, viable and reachable for more people. As an example, that's just one little tidbit. But I think we're in the education community, and it's not just at UND. It's everywhere. We're always looking for a better way to do it, and a more efficient and more effective way to do it.
We're going to be taking questions from the audience. If you think about it, if you want to stand up and ask one. Let me kind of throw one out there. Start with Dave. If you were king for a day, and just for a day, what would be the thing you'd do to try and fix this, to change that curve? You're just king for a day, and it's only a day, so you're going to have to work fast. So what would it be?
Kings get beheaded, so
certain ones anyway.
Certain ones.
Certain ones, yeah.
Kent and I love history, so I'd rather be kind of a person of influence.
Okay,
let's call it that. Just in response about the different training regiments, by the way, I think there should always be different sources of training. I really applaud the idea of a National Aviation Academy of some kind. My brother, a twin brother, is a professor at Massachusetts Maritime Academy, which complements the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. By the way, very similar to University of North Dakota. So I think even MPL is going to have a place, because you've got to develop different feed programs. What would I do if I was a person of influence for the day? I would say, take control of your destiny. We can take control of our destinies. In 2007, late 2007, our chief pilot is here. How many resumes did we have on file? 2 resumes. 2 resumes. That was it. We looked in the box, in the inbox. There were 2 resumes on file. One probably had a felony, and the other one was a roofing contractor that flew a Bonanza. We didn't have any pilots. None. Then we were blessed, some would say, at least in our industry. Oh, thank goodness there's another recession. We didn't know it was going to be as big, but the terrible recession occurred. We took control of our own destiny and said, let's develop a feed. Now, I don't know if my slides are available there,
Yep.
but there's a kind of, the first slide.
Allison, maybe go back to the
first one would be a typical, the current pathway to be a professional pilot, Allison.
Yeah.
So one that kind of goes like this.
We'll get it up there.
Okay. I got the sign that it's going to take 2 minutes to find it. So it's a pathway that doesn't take us through a path at all. It's kind of a patchwork quilt, and you hope that you get the hours, you hope you get the experience. And by the way, the regulator hopes that you get the right experience. And when they pass somebody, they go, are they just this proficient or are they this proficient? In 2007, using that model, that old model, we had a failure rate as high as 34%. For every 100 pilots we hired, 34 were sent home. 34%, because we refused to lower our standards. Everybody in this room refused to lower their standards, and that's why we ended up parking airplanes. With 2 resumes, 34% failure rate, we had to change the model. So we took control of our destiny. We sought out our partners. We have a lot of partners in the industry. One said, yes, we're interested in working with you, JetBlue. And we can go to my next slide if you'd like, if you could find it.
Yep.
We developed a pathway program. Many of you are already knowledgeable of this, so I won't go into great detail, but for those of you that aren't knowledgeable, this provides somebody in their sophomore year of college at an accredited institution the opportunity to interview to enter a program. They're not guaranteed a job, they're not guaranteed anything but a pathway. But a pathway is a powerful thing. It provides them the knowledge, skills, education, and training that they need at the greatest aviation academies in the country. Which, I don't know which one is the better, UND or Embry-Riddle?
We're
just pretty much equal.
There's many good programs.
Yeah. We didn't have to call up somebody at UND and says, does anybody know at UND? Kent and I serve on the Aviation Accreditation Board. I called up my friend Kent and said, Kent, are you interested? Using that relationship, he said, sure, let's work it. Called up my friend Tim Brady, the dean at Embry-Riddle, because he was my vice president when I was president of the Aviation Accreditation Board, and created a program with them. JetBlue said, this is great. We'd like jet transition training for your people. We knew it was in their curriculum, but we even built a jet transition course, which Cape Air pays for the students. So we took control of our destiny. Now there are 90 people populated in that program. We've had a little bit of attrition, but not a lot. 2 have now passed the final interview with JetBlue because they reached the threshold of 3,500 hours. They successfully passed the interview. Dan Thurber, Shanti Merriman, they both passed that interview. They passed the jet transition course with flying colors, and they are going to be in a pool, we understand, to be hired when JetBlue starts hiring later on this year, when everybody starts hiring later on this year, I suspect. That's a good news story for us. Those are 2 individuals that we've been able to know what their training was, keep a very, very good, solid culture for them. They've had good income throughout that period. They're excited about aviation, and I have been able to personally mentor them. Steve Phillips, our chief pilot, has been able to mentor them, and they will be part of us forever. And we're going to look at them with pride as we're sitting in the back of their airplane someday. So if I was a person of influence, I would say, develop your own destiny. Go to your carriers, your mainline carriers. Today is when the mainline carriers should start hiring. I know that they're going to wait for the finance department to say, okay, you can go ahead and hire because you're going to need them 2 months from now. They should start hiring today so we can start backfilling and start populating that pipeline so there is no compression wave. There will be a massive compression wave. I guarantee you we can mitigate that to a great extent, but everyone should be doing that. Why shouldn't a mainline carrier be coming to North Dakota right now, or St. Louis, or Jacksonville, or Purdue, or Embry-Riddle, and saying, I'm going to interview the flight instructors, and I'm going to ask them, if you pass that, I'm going to put you on a path to become a pilot for my airline, and I will pay you a stipend to stay as an instructor. So you don't feel like you have to jump ship. You don't feel like you have to bounce around the industry. They can kickstart their own pathway just as we have. I applaud ExpressJet and Delta because they created their own pathway, very much like ours. Ours is not unique. We can't take credit for it. We unabashedly took a lot of the great ideas in this room, so we can't lay claim to inventing something, but we took control of our destiny. We can grab the bull by the tail and rant and rave, but I suggest we now take the bull by the horns and provide a pathway for great young women and men who want to be aviators and make them excited about it. When we went to Kennedy 3 weeks ago, we fly our Cessna 414 into Kennedy during the low times. We don't go in the afternoon to visit JetBlue, because periodically. In the right seat was a Romanian immigrant, University of North Dakota graduate, who was our recruiter. His name's Cosmin Boudot. We said, do you want to fly into Kennedy? I've flown into Kennedy 1,000 times or more. I watched that young man fly into Kennedy, land there, flew IMC into Kennedy. He had a bigger smile on his face than John Young did when he landed the space shuttle. And he will never forget that. And that embedded in his heart and his mind that he wants to be an airline pilot. That's how we do it, one at a time. 4,900 people, that seems impossible. Cosmin Boudot seems a real possibility, and each one of us can own that.
One at a time. John, you were king?
I think the pathway issue is critical, and part of the pathway is the front end of that. How do we get the folks to you, to Cape Air, to provide that? And I think in non-traditional means for us, I think are important. And I think the Academy, the U.S. Academy methodology provides a lot of opportunity to do that. For a couple reasons. It leverages the good work that's already been done across the country. It gets all the stakeholders involved in a way that gives them part of the game. It also gives us the opportunity to address the issue of born or developed, because while pilots are not born, there certainly are people who have the ability to do it and others who don't. So we need to be able to screen. We need to be able to screen folks that are coming into the training program and make sure that they are folks that have the capability to be successful. We also need exit ramps along the way if they're not capable, and allow them to move on to something else if they're not capable of doing this kind of work.
What's the status of the Academy?
The status of the Academy is that we're promoting it right now. Right now we don't have any. We've got a lot of people excited, but nobody's stepping up just yet to help us make it happen. We're looking for that support, and I expect John is going to be moving to the next level to be looking for that support very soon. Now, there's a second thing. So I would answer your question since I've only got one day. I think I just established the groundwork to get that moving. The second thing I would do, however, is reinvigorate and open up the discussion about how we really need to train to get folks to the right seat of an air carrier aircraft that are properly prepared for that kind of operation. Notwithstanding how many hours they have, but that they are properly prepared. They have the training and they're properly prepared to be there and do that kind of work safely. So.
As we'll get to Ken. If anybody has a question from the audience, please just step up to the microphone, and we'd be glad to entertain it, whatever it might be. Ken?
If I was king for a day, well, I could start at the university, but anyway, we won't go there. Really, both both issues. I wanted to say the first thing that came to my mind was that if I can convince industry to reach out to young people in a more proactive manner, and the Gateway program and Pathway programs are one example of that, that will help to mitigate the problem. In the past, industries, and it was talking at RACA 2 weeks ago, one of the presidents of one of the companies, I used to be able to open the door of my building and yell out into the parking lot, "Who wants to fly with me?" And he said I'd get so many hands come up and they're just waiting there, and they got 3,000 hours of flying time. And he's saying that those days don't exist anymore. And I think industry in the United States has kind of been discussed, flight training and professional flying and so forth. We've taken it, we've had a rich background in the fact that we have comparatively to other countries, a strong general aviation infrastructure that is shrinking, but nevertheless it's there, and it's in excess of any other country on the planet. And so we've always had this people interested in wanting to fly professionally, and the industry has gotten by with that in the past of I'll put a notice up that we're hiring, and boom, we'll get the apps. That's what needs to change within industry, is that you've got to go out and sell yourself, you've got to go out and sell the profession, and you have to sell your companies. Young people, the current millennial generation, they are hardworking, they are creative, they have multiple passions, not just one or two, and because of that, you've got to go out and convince them that you're the right fit for them, and that's kind of a shift in what industry's had to do. So that's certainly one thing. The other thing is to kind of mimic what's already been said. We need to help people out, certainly from a financial standpoint, in some fashion. We have a luxury in higher education still with, comparatively, with financial aid funding and so forth. Some of the for-profit entities don't have those luxuries anymore, and they're part of the equation. They're part of the solution too. So we need a more viable method, and whether it be through the academy or other means to finance the process of learning to fly. Because one thing that's come out in our surveys of why young people don't like the concept of flying for an airline, part of it's lifestyle issue, and lifestyle issues are much more important to this younger generation than just the job. Second is the debt versus the pay, and it becomes an unsurmountable obstacle. So that those two issues, reaching out from industry to young people to help convince them and show the positive aspects of the business, because there's many challenges, as we saw, but for me personally, flying a 402 over to Nantucket would be a lot of fun, I think, and convincing people that it is a viable profession and it can be a rewarding career.
We spent $12 billion on next generation stuff. Just think if we just took a little fraction of that and invested it in the human capital that is in this industry. Mm-hmm. So you're going to keep hearing that from us all the time. Question from our very good friend, a face that's known for RAA for a long time, our great friend and colleague, the president of National Air Carrier Association, Oakley Brooks. And want to thank Oakley for the partnership this year at our convention. Oakley, his staff, and more importantly, all of his members and his and their people we've opened our doors to them this year, and they've turned out in a big way. So Oakley, thank you all for joining us. Great. Mike's yours.
Yes, and this was not going to be a promotion for the National Air Carrier Association, but I'd start by saying, Dave, I'm with you. Executive Airlines, 1968, worked for Joe Whitney, and so, your Joe and my Joe and all those years, they were great years. The only thing I'd want to say, and we picked up on it right at the end, the slide that showed the drop in pilot sign-ups, and it started in 1979. Now, I don't know whether that was just a coincidence, but we all remember that 1978 was deregulation. And the point I want to make is that if you've been interested in this business over the last, say, 15 years, and you're looking for a career, getting into this business as a pilot has been a tough slog. I mean, if you have eyes to read the bankruptcies, the carriers going out of business, the acrimony, the drop in salaries, the dislocations, it's been really tough. So for all the kids that have a lot of other things to do and watch what's going on, I'm not sure this is something I really want to get into. Which brings us back to, what are you going to do about it? And brings us back to the companies hyping. And of course now, you know, like that, you can get to millions of young students and everything. But we as an industry, from the regionals to the non-skeds and then to the big guys, I think if we're going to get people back into this industry, we've really got to recognize that we beat them up pretty hard over the last 15 years. Yep. Who the heck wants to do that? So that's a call just for us as an industry to realize we've got to do something. And there are, you know, this whole social network, boy, are there ways to get our story to those people. But we got to sort of get through the takeovers and the mergers and the strikes and the, you know, who knows how we're going to get through that. But if we can focus on that, I think that will bring people back. Oh, okay, not that bad industry. You remember back in deregulation and just thereafter, $350,000, you know, flying a wide body, great job. Before deregulation, no pilot ever lost his job due to an economic condition for a certificated airline. And look what's happened. So we've got it, but we've really got to get to them as an industry and tell our story and make it a good industry to get into. Thank you, Roger.
Oh, Oakley, actually, that was not planned, but because we're going to be wrapping up here, but he pointed out the question I was going to ask. What, you know, we've been doing all the hand-wringing and kvetching and everything else about this whole issue. What can every individual here attending this conference, our colleagues, what is one action item that they can do to help address the problem? John?
Well, I think Oakley described it pretty well, and I've heard other folks on the panel here, and that is the lifestyle issue. And what, you know, I came up through a time when if I complained about what I was getting paid, the answer frequently was, you ought to be paying us to let you fly our airplane. Yeah. So, and I accepted that. It was fun flying the airplane. On the other hand, the current generation doesn't find that acceptable, clearly. They clearly want something else. And I think we need to focus heavily on that.
Okay.
Well, and it's a good comment. First of all, this generation of young people, the only thing they've known about the airline industry is post 9/11, and with all the turmoil. So it is an issue. One thing I've tried to do in talking with young people is also share them that there's other industries that were severely affected by the economic downturn and issues like that. 500,000 jobs lost in the financial sector as an example, or those kinds of issues. So part of it's education on our part about the realities of quote, corporate America and what expectations are out there. You know, I know the money's an issue, pay's an issue, and I realize business models may not allow certain things there, but the lifestyle issue is an issue to them. Friends and family are more important than the job. You're not going to see as many young people walk through glass to get there that my generation went through. So can you do different things within the schedule of the airline to make it, from a lifestyle standpoint, a better place to be in their eyes?
Dave?
Establish relationships. Many of you have. Work harder at those relationships. Everybody in this room should be at a structured training academy. There's some great ones represented in the room, Flight Safety, AeroSim. They should be visiting campuses. Each one of us on the leadership team at Cape Air has a visit once in the spring, once in the fall to an academy or to a school. Get those relationships, get the word out, and get to know them as human beings. If you do that, you're going to connect. It's amazing when they sit and just have lunch in the cafeteria with you. They find out, wait a second, these guys are having fun. When they fly with us in the 414 or in the 402, they know that we're having fun. Yeah. Our mantra is Mocha Hagati, make our customers happy and have a good time doing it. That's what they live and breathe because they're part of us. Each one of you has such wonderful cultures, such a great time, and there's such great people at each of these carriers and each of these suppliers. We should be providing more internships. I know it costs money. I believe in paid internships, by the way. Every one of us should be doing an internship. Sometimes it's difficult to afford, but do it. So you get them in the door, you get the hook in them, and get them excited about it. I agree with what my other panelist members have said as well, but the relationships are so important. Kent is a dear friend for 10 or more years. I've got Guy Smith from Embry-Riddle sitting out there who's been a dear friend for a little bit longer than that. That's what we need in this industry, because then the pilots will become those dear friends, and we will be able to coach and mentor them, and it'll be better for all of us.
And if I could just
Sure.
interject, you know, there's a lot of way to reach young people through social media and things like that, but echoing what Dave has said, the face-to-face time is very, very important. And
Yeah.
regular visits, and certainly, and I'm speaking on behalf of my institution, open invitation. We'll get you in the classrooms, get you to talk to students and so forth. And I know there's people from Embry-Riddle, St. Cloud, Dubuque that are here, and I'm sure they would have a similar, the academies, they would have a similar mindset, and come and visit us.
Right over there at our exhibit hall, you see that University Commons. We've opened up the REA convention this year to all of our partners in the academic community, given a special space. So I think that's a perfect way to do it. You've got all day. Make sure you visit there, not only exchange your business cards, but really start those relationships. John, Kent, Dave, thank you very, very much. You'll be around here for the day. Let's have a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. The exhibit hall essentially will be open here in a minute. Again, want to urge everybody to come on back here at 10:30 to hear NTSB member Mark Rosekind will be joining us, and then to hear the real inspiring story at lunchtime of Barrington Irving, someone who changes the paradigm of what we've been discussing. So thanks, everybody. Great guy to talk to. All right. Okay, fellas, thank you. We really enjoyed it.